One regular day of Hull City. That's all I ask for. It will never happen. When Hull City appointed Liam Rosenior in November 2022, the Tigers were 21st in the Championship, 1 point above the relegation zone, with the division's worst goal difference and the most goals conceded. 18 months on, Hull just finished 7th in the Championship, 1 place and 3 points off the playoff places, in a campaign which has included victories away at Coventry, Leicester and Southampton. That's despite Hull City, as per the last set of accounts, only having the 16th highest wage bill, the 17th highest squad cost, and the 19th highest revenue in the division. It was a season which saw Rosenior nominated for the Championship Manager of the Season award, alongside Leeds' Daniel Farke and Ipswich's Kieran McKenna. But just 3 days on from Hull's final game of the season, and less than 6 months after he was rewarded with a brand new 3-year deal, Rosenior has been sacked. It's a decision which has baffled many onlookers, both neutrals and Hull City fans alike. Meanwhile, others have tried to justify it by pointing out Hull's ambitious January recruitment, the attacking talent that Rosenior had at his disposal, and failure to sneak into the playoffs. Either way, lots of people are asking the question, what on earth is going on at Hull City? Well, as some of you will know, for my sins, I am a Hull City fan, and as some of you may also know, I have a bit of a habit of making videos about chaotic football clubs and trying to claim that it's a job. You can probably see where this one is going. In fact, this is my 5th video about Hull City in the last 5 years, and every time people seem to enjoy them. I guess that you're all just sadists who like seeing a man in pain. Well, lucky you, because that's exactly what you're about to get. So sit back, relax, and join me on a journey to Kingston upon Hull, the birthplace of football, in its modern codified form, Britain's most preeminent abolitionist politician, and of course, the most entertaining and informative creator on YouTube, as we attempt to make sense of Hull City's decision to sack Liam Rosenior, the enormous rebuild which is required at the MKM Stadium ahead of next season, and some important details about the club's ownership, which rarely receive much attention within the English media. If there's one word that I would never associate with Hull City, it is probably stability. Over the last 10 years, it feels as though every season has required a rebuild. In the 2013-14 season, after winning promotion to the Premier League, Steve Bruce replaced over half of the club's starting 11. In 2014-15, despite survival and reaching an FA Cup final, again, over half a new team was brought in, including big names like Hatem Ben Arfa and Gaston Ramirez. In 2015-16, following relegation, there was a whole raft of departures and major surgery had to be done. In 2016-17, despite winning promotion back into the Premier League, the Tigers somehow managed to go on a pre-season tour with only 9 senior players. In 2017-18, having been relegated again, practically a brand new 11 came in as the likes of Harry Maguire and Andy Robertson departed. In 2018-19, half of the Hull squad were out of contract, necessitating another overhaul. In 2019-20, Jared Bowen and Kamil Grosicki's sales, with horrific replacements, resulted in relegation, prompting another rebuild in 2020-21, with the Tigers returning to the Championship in the 2021-22 season under an EFL transfer embargo, which meant that they weren't allowed to sign players for fees. Naturally, 3 new players were still signed on free transfers, 4 more came in on loan, and 9 players left the club. Off the pitch, meanwhile, things were even more chaotic. The Allams, who saved the club from the looming threat of administration in 2010, oversaw Hull's highest ever league finish, first FA Cup final, and first foray into European football, qualifying for the UEFA Europa League. Allam ought to have been heralded as a hero, with a statue of him erected outside of the ground. And he would have been, had he not been a spiteful megalomaniac who, in his own words, was not a football fan and had never been a football fan. After falling out with Hull City Council, who own Hull City Stadium, because they wouldn't let him buy and develop on it for a nominal fee, Allam decided that he didn't like the words Hull City very much. No. That was all a little bit too Hull City Council-ish for his liking, so he decided that he would change the club's name. I'm sorry, what? No, you heard me right. He decided to change the club's name. Hull Tigers was the name that Allam Sr. had his heart set on, and, not being a football fan and all, he was shocked when Hull City fans politely informed him that they actually quite liked their name and certainly preferred it to sounding like a mini-league baseball team from Portland, Oregon. Allam, seeing the error of his ways, said, "I hear you, I understand you, I am only a custodian, of course I won't change the club's over 100-year name out of spite at the council against your wishes under the guise of marketing and promoting the club in Asia." Nah, I'm just kidding, that is exactly what he did. When the FA rejected Mr. Allam's request to change the club's name, having been lobbied by the Hull City Supporters Trust, Allam had a brand new enemy. Hull City Council was off the hook momentarily, and Hull City fans were now the hostile force that Assem was prepared to wage war against. Headlines like this one, "Hull City is irrelevant, common and lousy," is more the kind of attack line that you expect from a rival fan after 7 pints in a pub, not from, well, you know, the owner of Hull City. In fairness, most Hull City fans soon forgot about the irrelevant, common and lousy line right after he told them that they could, quote, "die when they want." You've got to hand it to him, it's a great diversion tactic. Good job, Assem. Anyway, after trying and failing to change the club's name and alienating supporters, Allam Sr. decided that he no longer wanted anything to do with the club, so he put his son Ehab in charge of the job, who was somehow even stupider and even worse at PR than him. This, it should be said, was after the Allams had already announced that they would no longer be putting any money into the club, while still earning 5% interest on their personal loans to Hull City. Concessionary tickets were scrapped meanwhile, meaning children and pensioners were charged the same full price as adults, creating a cocktail of hatred and distrust, which saw thousands fall out of love with the club, and Hull City crowds fall from over 21,000 when the Allams arrived to less than 10,000, by far the lowest that they had ever been since Hull's move to the MKM Stadium. You will understand, therefore, why, when Hull City got new owners in January 2022, it was celebrated with almost as much enthusiasm as VE Day in Kingston upon Hull, a city which saw 95% of its buildings damaged or destroyed during the Second World War. The Acun Media Group, owned and operated by Turkish media mogul Acun Ilicali, was the man behind the takeover of Hull City. And so, in the January 2022 transfer window, the Tigers were busy once again. 5 players were brought in mid-season by the new ownership regime, and 6 days before the transfer window slammed shut, manager Grant McCann was sacked, following back-to-back wins against Blackburn and Bournemouth, and replaced by Shota Arveladze, a man who had never coached in British football before, and had been out of work for over 12 months, with his last job coming in Uzbekistan. The 2022 summer transfer window was absolutely wild, even by Hull City standards. Starman Keane Lewis Potter was sold for an initial £16 million to Brentford, as fellow stalwarts George Honeyman and club captain Richie Smallwood also departed, and in came, well, there's really no way of sugarcoating it, 16 new players. Aliar Saimanesh, Dokan Sinik, and Ozan Tufan were signed for in excess of £10 million from Turkish Super League clubs. Meanwhile, Jean-Michael Seri, Oscar Estepinian, and Adama Traore were all signed on free transfers, but with significant salaries. Hull City's operating expenses rose 66% from the 2021-22 to 2022-23 season, most of that due to the club's wage bill, which basically doubled in the space of a single season, rising from £12.7 to £23.7 million. On the pitch, Ilicali didn't get a great deal of bang for his buck. Arveladze was sacked just 2 months into the new season and replaced by Liam Rosenior, who spent 5 years at Hull during his playing days, and the Tigers finished 15th, just 4 places and 7 points better off than the previous season. Sure enough, last summer, Hull went wild yet again. 10 new senior players were brought in, meanwhile 9 departed. As if that wasn't quite enough, in the January window, Hull welcomed a further 7 fresh faces into the club, 4 of them on loan, as another 6 players departed. Excluding academy graduates, the longest-serving player at Hull City is Alfie Jones, who made his debut in February 2020. And so, that rather terse summary brings us to where we are now. Another summer, another rebuild. If we take this as being Hull City's strongest 11 at the end of the season, and as a decent reflection of what might have been Liam Rosenior's first-choice team with everyone fit, you could make a case for Tufan over Slater, Slater at right back instead of Coyle, Jacob ahead of Giles or a change of keeper, but it wouldn't be too far off. Giles, Morton, Carvalho and Delap were all on loan, so assuming that deals can't be done for any of them, although there is some debate regarding Giles on that issue, you can take them out. Jacob Greaves and Jaden Philogene have been two of the standout players in the Championship this season, and are both expected to join Premier League clubs for in excess of £20 million, so you can probably take the pair of them out, which leaves you with this. Yeah, it's 5 players. There are squad players too. Ozan Tufan, Sean McLaughlin, and Matty Jacob are still under contract. Meanwhile, Turkish international Abdulkadir Ömür, signed in the January transfer window, showed real promise following his arrival, without managing to find the back of the net. Oh, and of course, the glue that was holding it all together, well, you can take him out now too. Given the scale of change, in terms of player incomings and outgoings this summer, Rosenior would have been the one element of stability and continuity from last season. Now that's gone too. A new manager will inherit almost an entirely new squad, and the expectations of them will be immense from day one. When a new manager replaces someone who has been struggling, as is typically the case, it puts them in a strong starting position. It doesn't take much for them to improve on what came before them and earn themselves a bit of credit. And even if they struggle just as much, they tend to be partially immune from criticism because the team was struggling before them, and they can point to the fact that they haven't had time to bring in their own players or implement their ideas. When a new manager replaces someone who has been doing quite well by contrast, as we saw with Wayne Rooney at Birmingham City this season, who replaced John Eustace, a sacking which was similarly unpopular to Rosenior's, it makes it a far more difficult job. In his first partial season, Rosenior took Hull from 21st when he arrived, just 1 point above the relegation zone, to 15th, 14 points clear of the drop. In his first full season, this season, with a pre-season under his belt and some degree of influence over recruitment, Rosenior took Hull from 15th to 7th, missing out on the playoffs by 3 points on the final day of the season. The natural progression, therefore, although football obviously doesn't always work like that, but certainly the expectation on Rosenior next season would have been to continue that track record of improvement, qualifying for the playoffs at a minimum, if not mounting a push for automatic promotion. That means that for Rosenior's successor, anything short of the playoffs, and arguably anything short of promotion, will be deemed as a failure, and the decision to sack Rosenior an ill-judged one. There are criticisms that could be levelled at Rosenior, as there are with all managers. He was wedded to a very patient, possession-based style of football, which lacks ruthlessness and could sometimes create a toxic atmosphere at home, as fans grew more and more frustrated. Hull had the 5th best away record in the Championship this season, collecting as many points on the road as third-place Leeds, but at home, they only won 2 more games than they lost, putting them 13th in the Championship's home table. Expectations were also significantly ramped up in January, when Hull probably had the most ambitious and certainly the most active transfer window in the Championship, bringing in the likes of Ryan Giles, Anas Arori, and, most notably, Fabio Carvalho. Having been 7th at the start of the month, it seemed evident that the expectation among the Hull City hierarchy was that these new arrivals would be enough to get into the playoffs and mount a promotion challenge. Instead, Hull's form between January and the end of the season was worse than it had been before that investment. The Tigers won 8, lost 6, and drew 7 of their last 21 games, ranking them 10th in the division's form table during that time. The decision to stick with Ryan Alsop ahead of Ivor Panda, a young goalkeeper signed from Fortuna Sittard in January, failing to get the best out of the likes of Zarori, who, admittedly, was injured for large periods, and Giles, and particularly persistently giving minutes to another January arrival, Billy Sharp, who looked to have lost any and all mobility, ahead of yet another January arrival, Noah Ohio, who looked raw but dangerous and scored thrice from cameo appearances, also drew criticism from some quarters. Perhaps the biggest problem of all with Rosenior, however, was Hull's inability to grind out a win when it mattered most. A run of 6 games without a win, which included a draw at home against relegated Birmingham and a defeat against a woefully out-of-form Stoke team, was what ultimately scuppered Hull's playoff hopes, and even on the final day of the season, when there was still the remotest chance of sneaking in if results elsewhere went their way, they didn't turn up away at Plymouth, dropping one of their worst performances of the season and losing 1-0. There are several legitimate criticisms within there, some of which I would consider harsh, and one of which I think is basically totally bogus, but the fact that Rosenior wasn't quite the finished article should hardly have come as a surprise to anyone at Hull City. Before they appointed him, he had literally managed a grand total of 12 games on an interim basis at Derby County. This season, in which Hull finished 7th, I'll just remind you, up from 21st when Rosenior arrived, was Rosenior's first full season in management with any club. If you appoint a 38-year-old with 12 games under his belt, that would surely indicate that you had a long-term project in mind, and if, in the space of 18 months, that project has taken you from the edge of the bottom three to the fringes of the playoffs, what exactly would have been deemed satisfactory progress? It's for that reason, partly, why I always found Hull's January investment to be a little bit strange. It felt as though the club were building something with a talented young squad and a talented young manager, competing admirably in the most competitive championship in years, if not of all time. The strength of the top four, three of them with three of the biggest budgets the championship has ever seen, were already out of sight by January, meaning that the best case scenario for Hull would have been finishing 5th or 6th and going up via the playoffs. That wasn't an impossible task, but it was always likely to be tough, and restricting future spending capabilities due to FFP regulations by throwing significant cash at the Hail Mary promotion push always seemed like a strange and premature decision to me. Although, at a time of great excitement among Hull City fans, quite understandably, I was probably in a minority of about one. It would surely have made more sense, to me at least, to keep building this season more sustainably, allowing players and Rosenior to use this season to learn and gain experience as a group, then recruit and look to push on next season with the benefit of that experience in what will likely be a much easier championship, so to speak, to win promotion from, without such a dominant top four and with 3 weaker Premier League teams likely to have replaced them. To be clear, as there does seem to be some confusion outside of Hull City, it's not as though the club rolled the dice last season, and failure to win promotion means surefire financial ruin, FFP breaches, and points deductions. The wage bill will have risen again, although some high earners were offloaded, and the next set of accounts will show a significant loss for the second successive season, but most of those signings were loans without major loan fees. The almost guaranteed sales of Jayden Philogene or Jacob Greaves, or most likely both, for in excess of £20 million each, will put Hull comfortably within the Championship's 3-year profit and loss limit, with some wiggle room to spare and a fair amount of cash to be reinvested. What it does mean, however, is that a smaller percentage of the revenue generated from those sales will be able to be reinvested into the playing squad next season than would have been the case if the club hadn't gone quite so hard in the January window. It should be noted at this point that sacking Rosenior also won't have come cheap. The Tigers rewarded Rosenior with a new 3-year deal in December. They were 6th at the time, 1 place higher than they finished. Sacking Rosenior 5 months after he put pen to paper on a new long-term deal, after you have slid 1 place down the league table, even if hindsight proves to be kind to that decision, makes Hull's owners appear to be slightly short-sighted and trigger-happy in the here and now. Before Liam Rosenior was appointed, the first 12 months of Adjan Ilicali's ownership were marred by erratic decision-making, delusional statements, and poor recruitment. In fairness, the delusional statements didn't stop after Rosenior was appointed. Ilicali was talking about getting into Europe as recently as March, but they were somewhat tempered. The point being, it was only after Rosenior's appointment, inexperienced as he is, that it felt as though some sanity and level-headedness had been brought to the club, some experience and understanding of English football and the Championship in particular, and some sense of direction within the transfer market. Outstanding work had been done in terms of fan engagement and increasing attendances, which has continued throughout Rosenior's time at the club, with average attendances having risen from 12,888 to 21,980, with several sellouts, for which Ilicali deserves enormous credit. But on the football side of things, he seemed to have the idea, before Rosenior arrived, that he was playing fantasy football. I'll take a striker from Portugal, a couple of players from Fenerbahce, who, by the way, are the club that he supports, has very close ties to, reportedly of both a personal and a financial nature, A couple of other players that I like in Turkey and across the continent. In fact, basically everyone Hull signed have played in Turkey at some stage. I'll double the wage bill, appoint a coach who is well liked in Turkey, and we'll romp the division. It's a delusion that a lot of foreign owners unfamiliar with English football fall into the trap of believing. With Rosenior gone, his sacking in of itself seemingly quite a rash and erratic decision, I think there is a rational fear that the missteps and poor decision-making may return, and given the scale of the rebuild required this summer, those could be the most fatal missteps yet. The biggest problem at Hull City, and I have said this throughout Ilicali's reign, is the lack of football people, so to speak, in any senior roles. There isn't a chairman, director of football, or CEO with any experience running a football club, and sometimes it shows. Owner and chairman Acun Ilicali is a media mogul, well versed in making friends and influencing people, and creating entertaining reality television shows. Meanwhile, Vice Chairman Tan Kesler, who manages the club's day-to-day operations, spent 9 years working for the Turkish Football Federation as a strategic planner, alongside 6 years working for the football agency Wasserman's Turkish division. While I was recording this video, Ilicali appeared on TalkSport giving an interview to Jim White and Simon Jordan, in which he stated that the results weren't the reason for Rosenior's dismissal, but that it owed to disagreements around his style of play. Essentially, Ilicali wanted to see fast, exciting and attacking football, whereas Rosenior favours a more patient, possession-based build-up built on solid defensive foundations. When Rosenior was appointed, don't forget, Hull City had by far the worst defensive record in the Championship, something which he was able to rectify with impressive speed and efficiency, even before bringing any of his own players in. No football club, or no serious football club at least, should be sacking a manager because someone with zero football pedigree doesn't like their style of play. If that is how you run a football club, it is a surefire road to disaster. It's also totally incoherent. Rosenior's style of play was very well understood at Derby, yet Ilicali still appointed him, and even if it hadn't have been, it certainly was just 6 months ago, after over a year in the job, when Ilicali awarded him with a new 3-year deal. Because of what preceded him, namely the Allams, being so toxic and divisive, there are some Hull City fans who seem to think that Acun Ilicali can do no wrong. You see this a lot within English football. The reliance on owners is perceived as being so fundamental that they are deified, with any and all criticism deemed to be blasphemous. Ironically, the same thing actually happened with the Allams, who were hailed as saviours when they first arrived, with most fans taking their side when Hull City Council refused to sell them the stadium and allow them to develop the surrounding area. It was only once the name change proposals happened, and the vindicativeness of the Allams became more apparent, that public opinion shifted. The reality, however, is that few owners are saints, saviours, or even benevolent dictators. Most, in fact, aren't even fans. There are only a handful of owners in the Premier League or Championship who actually support the clubs that they own, and one of them, Jim Radcliffe, is such a die-hard Manchester United fan that about 2 years ago, he tried to buy Chelsea. Ilicali, likewise, is a Fenerbahce fan. There's nothing wrong with that. Who made the bulk of his fortune following a failed coup attempt in Turkey, which saw the nation's media parcelled up and handed out to government allies. Maybe there is something wrong with that. In 2016, a faction within the Turkish armed forces attempted a coup d'etat against the government and Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. The coup failed, but Erdogan used it as a justification to clamp down on dissenting voices and opposition figures. He declared emergency legislation and implemented severe media and press crackdowns, the beneficiaries of which, unsurprisingly, tended to be staunch Erdogan supporters and allies. Doğan Holding, for example, one of Turkey's largest media conglomerates, was sold to Demirören Holding for almost $900 million in 2018. Doğan Holding, which owned the popular newspaper Hürriyet and TV channels including Kanal D and CNN Turk, was the last remaining major media outlet which still permitted criticism of the president. Demirören Holding, who acquired the company's entire media division, is a private company owned entirely by the Demirören family, who have very close ties to Erdogan. Since then, it would be fair to say that formerly Doğan Holding-owned publications have taken a significantly less critical bent in terms of their coverage of the president. Following that takeover, it was reported that over 90% of Turkey's media ecosystem was owned by Erdogan allies, accelerating Turkey's slide towards autocratic rule. Ilicali is less explicit about his political views, though he's made no secret of his relationship with Erdogan, posting photographs of the two of them playing football on his personal Instagram account. When Agen Media acquired the Turkish television channel TV8 in 2013, they scrapped the channel's hard-hitting news show, replacing it with reality TV shows and light entertainment. In the background at Hull City, meanwhile, lies Murat Alka, Turkey's richest or second richest person, depending on which day you check, with an estimated net worth of around $5 billion. Alka has visited the MKM Stadium, donned a Hull City shirt in the club's shop, and, since September 2023, has become one of the club's 5 principal sponsors through the vehicle of McVitie's, reportedly in exchange for quite a hefty sum. It has been speculated that Alka, by virtue of the wealth at his disposal and his relationship with Ilicali, may be involved beyond a mere sponsorship deal alone. That is pure speculation at this stage, which I covered more extensively with a comprehensive deep dive into Hull City's commercial partners in my last video about the club, which I will leave a link to at the end, but it felt remiss of me not to mention it. The point being, when English football fans, including Hull City fans, say things like, you don't make money by making poor decisions, in defence of footballing decisions made by their owners, I suppose there is a degree of truth to that, if you think that it's smart cozying up to a quasi-dictator and capitalising upon a crackdown on free speech, but it doesn't exactly illustrate a first-class ability when it comes to hiring or firing football managers. This is, after all, the same man who appointed Shotar Arveladze fresh off the back of a 3-year stint in Uzbekistan and then sacked him literally on the morning of a game following a 2-week international break. There is a long line of people who have been extremely successful in business, for a variety of different reasons, where that hasn't translated into being first-class football operators. If I were advising Hull City, and I really don't see any reason why I shouldn't, I have as much high-level experience as anyone else at the club, whilst being much less excitable and erratic, I would tell Agen Ilicali to stick to sales and PR, where he is experienced, capable, and has already done an outstanding job. I would limit Tan Kesler's role to overseeing the club's finances and day-to-day operations where, presumably, he must have some competence, and could lessen the burden on those more focused on football, and then I would appoint a capable and preferably experienced CEO or director of football, if not both, to make all football decisions, and then, as is the case with almost all well-run clubs, I'd have the owner leave them well alone in that regard. It is of course possible that Ilicali, Kesler, and whoever else is involved in that decision nail Rosenior's replacement. At the time of recording, Tim Walter, Steve Cooper, Danny Roll and Will Still are the most heavily linked potential successors to Liam Rosenior. All have their merits, and there is a world in which all 4 could work out. But my own personal view is that until there is a separation between the owner and the club's fundamental football decisions, and until there is someone competent and level-headed in charge of those decisions, there will always be instability. After all, Agen Ilicali appointed a manager who plays a very specific style of football, allowed him to sign players to fit that system and style of play, and rewarded him with a new 3-year contract while he was still playing that style of football. 6 months on, he's decided that he's bored and he no longer wants to see that style of play. It is never dull supporting Hull City, which is why, much as I might make jokes, I love it. I don't actually mind that Agen Ilicali seems a bit mad. This is a club, after all, that was once owned by Don Robinson, a one-time professional wrestler who rode around Boothbury Park on horseback dressed as a cowboy, launched his own brand of Tiger Cola, and declared his ambition for Hull City to become the first football club to play on the moon. In the words of Jose Mourinho, this is football heritage. In fairness, no other team has played on the moon just yet, so there is still a chance. But my love of chaos is nonetheless tinged by sadness. Liam Rosenior was, and still is, to all intents and purposes a good man who did a good job, and was popular among supporters and players alike, and seemed to be building something positive at a club that has felt sour and miserable for so long. His dismissal not only threatens to undermine that progress and harm our chances of both retaining key players and bringing back others who were close with him, more importantly, it threatens to undermine that feeling of positivity and togetherness that the club has been yearning for so long. As for Liam Rosenior's successor, all they need to do is rebuild the squad from scratch, get them playing attacking and exciting football, and at least make the playoffs, if not win promotion, most likely with a mid-table wage bill. Now what, I ask you, is so hard about any of that? That is it for today's video. As with all Hull City videos, and indeed most videos on this channel if we're being honest, I could go on for hours, but I am aware that most people are significantly less interested in Hull City than I am. Nonetheless, I hope you enjoyed today's video. Hit the like button if that was the case. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments, whether you are a Hull City fan or not. And make sure, it goes without saying, that you are subscribed and have notifications turned on not just for this channel, but also my second channel, Alfie Potsama, both of which should be about to appear on your screens now, along with a couple of videos, including that Hull City one that I mentioned a moment ago, on your screen now, yes, like I say, so, do all of that probably, if you're feeling... you don't have to, it's just an option. You can also find me on Twitter, Instagram or Threads via the username at HITC Sevens on all three. And all of those links plus a whole lot more good stuff should be down in the video description below. Cheers. Up the Tigers.